the two-hand hammer. Dan scoops and scores with 2.7 to go in the pit. Now he rips it with a right hand. The fans can feel it now. It's a Lobo celebration in Vegas.
This is the Lobo Pod with the voice of the Lobos, Robert Portnoy.
Hello, Lobo fans. Welcome into another edition of the Lobo Pod. I'm your host, Robert Portnoy. We have the president and founder of 505 SVF, the New Mexico Lobo Athletics Department official collective. He's Kurt Roth, my good friend. Kurt, how are you?
I'm great, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome to have you in studio. And how about these plush new digs over here in the new athletic department offices? This is not bad, is it?
Not bad at all. I'm very impressed.
All right. Well, appreciate the time. And let me start here. Congratulations on another great event. I know that you are part of Enchantment now as well. And I thought that the exhibition game in the pit was just phenomenal.
Yeah, it was really a great show. I thought the turnout was really good. And seeing all the old players and come back was fun. And we had talked about this before. It was also bittersweet, honoring the memory and the careers of three great Lobos from different eras, all who passed away way before their time.
Let's talk about that for just a second, because I think the thing that struck me most as I've talked about this with people over the past 3 months, you mentioned three different legends, one in April, one in May, one in June, all passed way before their time. What people have said, and it's people like you who have such a history with Lobo basketball and the program, and yours dates all the way back to the 70s, they have seen these generations of players, and they have memories of all of them. And these people that we've lost meant so much to you as a Lobo fan and a Lobo alum. It really impacted a lot of people.
Oh, no doubt about it. For me, it's funny in a way that because of the social media, the internet and whatnot, I left Albuquerque in 1977. So my connection to Greg Brown as a player was minimal. Maybe I'd see one game a year on television. Maybe could see some highlights sometimes. ESPN wasn't even, or was just starting. But I got to know Greg Brown here, as an adult and as a guy who stayed in touch. And I love that, a guy who stayed in Albuquerque and loved Albuquerque. And to me, that memory that made it much more powerful when I heard at 51 years old he had died. Because that's part of what I want with the NIL movement is to make the University of New Mexico, make Albuquerque important to the student athletes who want to stay. Because that's all part of what our goal is at 505 is retention and then making this a great place to live.
So now, a few years into the NIL world of college athletics, I hope that some of this is covering ground that has already been covered enough to where people are educated. But I do believe it's still very much informational to get to that first when we have you in a setting like this, so that if someone is wondering, NIL, what does that stand for? And what is a collective, really, that we should start there, just so that the starting point for the rest of our conversation today makes sense to everybody.
All right. Well, NIL is just an acronym for name, image, and likeness, which came out of the O'Bannon lawsuit, which is there's a whole history of litigation that got us to this point that basically said if a third party wants to pay a student athlete for anything, it can't impact on his or her eligibility. One of my colleagues in this business, Paul Grindstaff down at New Mexico State, has told me NIL actually stands for not into losing. which I loved. I stole it from him, but Paul, I gave you credit. I think you stole it from someone else. So the need for a collective is to, instead of having individuals trying to use a student athlete's name, image, and likeness for advertising, for personal appearances, we try to organize it and move forward as one, which is necessary in the actual functionality of this thing.
So when someone goes to 505sports.org, your website, what will they see?
Well, they see all sorts of good stuff. There's great content, interviews. You may not have access to the content unless you join us on basically a monthly level. For $20 a month, you get access to a message board and all our content. You also get invited to some private events that we have around the various sports. So it's a great deal. Again, 505sports.org. It's really easy to figure out, and we look forward to increasing that membership regularly.
I think a question that a lot of people might have, and I already said that you're a Lobo alum, is why? Why did you decide that you wanted to be the guy to push this forward?
Well, I didn't want to be the guy. I knew that it needed to be done immediately. It was sort of a combination of where I was in my life, what I had done as a career, and the bottom line is, I got here in 1973. The Lobos were led by a kid out of Brooklyn. They won the WAC championship, went to the NCAA. The pit was 6 years old. It was raucous. We sat down on the court, the students. We celebrated during the games. And I had come from New York City, or New York at the time, where the Knicks, for people who don't know this, dominated the NBA. So I came from a young, relatively new Madison Square Garden into a relatively new pit and went from one hotbed to another, and I became obsessed. So we go ahead 50 years. And the law changes, and I'm a lawyer. I still practice in New Mexico and New York. I was a former NBA agent. I ran an AAU team. And as an entrepreneur, I saw a situation where there were no rules. Or there were some, but I knew them as well as anybody. And it just seemed like a great opportunity, kind of a retirement job.
You
so
gave
here
me
I am.
a bunch of the answers I was already looking for, but where's the seed for the love of hoops? Because you played too. How did that start?
I just grew up in New York in the 60s, and I had two uncles who were basketball coaches, and we went to games. And, I went to my first Lobo game with my uncle, who was a high school basketball coach, in Madison Square Garden. In the spring of 1973, I had already accepted. I'd been accepted at UNM, and we went to the NIT every year, or for a couple of years in a row, which was the big deal. And all 16 teams came to New York. And that Sunday afternoon in March, CBS, national TV, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Lobos and Virginia Tech. Well, that was the game. I didn't even know it until like the day before. I said, wow, I'm going there. Lobos lost the heartbreaker to Virginia Tech, who won the tournament, and I was hooked.
You mentioned you ran an AAU team. I know you coached. Is that ever something that you thought about doing?
No. Well, I thought about it, but I was too busy career-wise with the law and some other investments I had. So coaching, I think I love the sport and I love dealing with the kids, but I never really had the time to invest in it.
Your passion and knowledge for Lobo basketball history is as good as most, probably any. Give us your top 5. Everybody loves that question, and there's so many great generations of players, but who are your favorites? Who are the best? Who are the ones that stand out for you? Who are the ones that gave you the most memories?
Well, it's really hard because so many let's look at Danny Granger. He was here a year and a half. Now, he's one of the coolest guys I've ever met at UNM, great player, NBA star. I give him like an honorable mention because he had a year and a half. I think one guy we would talk about now and just recently after the 4 days in Vegas is Jalen House. I mean, come on. He carried that team on his back for 4 straight days. I didn't see that coming. One game at a time, yes, but if you told me, are they going to run the table? Unlikely. He's in there. Clearly, for me, the numbers 72 and 3 stand out when you talk Lobo basketball. And that's the UNM men's basketball record in the pit during Kenny Thomas's career. And so, to me, there's no doubt 4 years, that criteria he matches, which I think is important. We'll change it now because of the transfer portal and going pro. But Kenny Thomas, to me, is the number 1 Lobo of all time. And I don't even think it's close. You can argue, but I don't think it's close. I also think if you want to talk top 5 Lobos, and he's not a player, but Bob King has to be in the top 5 because he basically created the program in an era where there was segregation in the South. The SEC had no black players, that Bob King was just a generational leader here. And he basically built the pit. So, but then you have to talk about Mel Daniels, you get him in there. But if you look at the guys who played 4 years, or 3 years, because when I came, you couldn't play 4 years. You could only play 3, no freshmen. Clayton Shields, of course, Phil Smith, Charles Smith, Lamont Long. Those teams were so good. There's so many. But, right now I'm thinking I have three impactful Lobos, and it's Kenny, our coach, Coach King, and Jalen House.
I love it. I got to ask this because it's an era of Lobo basketball that's so close to my heart. The three-peat team that finished off its 3rd consecutive Mountain West tournament title in March of 2014 had multiple legends on it. Do you have a favorite from that era?
That's tough. Yeah, I love that era. And again, we were talking about this the other day because last night we saw Bryce. And I was talking to a guy who said, yeah, I still boo Steve Alford. And I want to take a statement there. I can't see how any Lobo fan can boo Steve Alford. He created a thing here that was it was incomparable, those three-peats. And I love knocking the you-know-what out of San Diego State and UNLV. If I had to pick a favorite on that team, 1, because it's on the court, and 2, I've come to know him as a professional in his fledgling career as an agent, a basketball agent. That's Cam Bairstow. Just a great guy. We danced around discussions around his brother when I knew he was leaving Utah State. And we interacted, and Cam is now relocated to London. He's working as an agent in and around Europe. So if I was forced to, there's Kendall, there's Kirk, all those guys.
Hugh Greenwood.
Hugh is great.
Yeah. Snell was part of that era.
Yeah. Snell. Yeah. It's just, they're all great guys.
Who's who? It's a who's who. Okay. So let's circle back to 505 SVF now, the Lobos official collective, generates partnerships that allow the student athletes to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. From where we started to where we've come to where now there is an alliance, right? There's a partnership where UNM Athletics and 505 SVF are working together.
Yes, hand in glove. We call it the Lobo Alliance. It's a collaboration with the UNM Athletics, specifically UNM Lobo Club, and 505 SVF, and that's relatively new, last couple of months. We were a licensed partner. Our logo we're allowed to use a UNM logo. We appear in the pit on ads. You talk about us in post-game shows and whatnot. So we are involved, but there's been a change, a big, major change at UNM with us, 505, when I say us, being recognized as a real partner. And that's huge.
Where do we go from here now with development of this space in college athletics and what it's going to look like moving forward? Obviously, 505sports.org and 505 SVF have been so crucial in putting Lobo basketball on the map. You want this to happen to where it is impacting significantly the entire athletic department, and it needs to continue to grow. And that's not an easy thing.
No, it's not. We need vast public and corporate support, and we're getting there. I don't know where it goes, but I do feel that there will be a need, especially when you're not a P4 team, because they're talking vast amounts of money being paid to those schools, and then the school being allowed in some level to compensate. But we're already seeing issues with that. The NCAA is trying to control that payment. So I don't see that working. I don't see any settlement with the students. I don't see any salary cap, which people love to talk about, unless the student athletes agree to it. In all the pro sports, people say salary cap. Well, there's really not. If Ohtani makes $700 million, there's no salary cap. But there's a structure, and those structures in all the pro sports have been agreed to by the players' union. So unless there's some kind of representation for the student athletes, there's going to be private groups or entities paying kids to come to the school of their choice. That's a long-winded answer, and I didn't even answer your question, but I think a collective at a school at the level of UNM will always be necessary. And I think the future is our continued partnership with UNM.
So where do we go from here in terms of the next round of realignment? There certainly is more coming, and NIL and collectives and student athletes being compensated for their name, image, and likeness is going to be part and parcel to that. And every university across the landscape is trying to position itself. What does that look like?
Well, that's a great question. Who knows? I do know that realignment from day one, from 10 years ago, with the Big East breaking up, was all about football. There's no doubt about it. It's football, football, football. We're big. Obviously, the moneymaker here has been basketball, but it's football drives the equation there. And UNM's in a great place, believe it or not. We talk about Bronco Mendenhall. We're set up at UNM with a fairly strong collective movement. We're still working on it, and everybody out there, we do need your support. But Bronco Mendenhall and his staff have got us in a position we haven't been in quite some time. I think it's vital to UNM's interest just financially, it's clear, but for any realignment position is to have a successful football program. And I think we're going to have it.
Litigation, lots of it out there still to be adjudicated, and we're going to see what that looks like. You expect the landscape for the student athlete only to continue to get better and better?
I do. I think as the market takes hold, which it has. I mean, there was all sorts of confusion, but the market, any market, has a life of its own. And we've seen, and I kind of misread this a little bit. I didn't feel that the payments to the students would escalate in the way they did, and they have for basketball and football. It's interesting, though, when you read about the payments to the SEC teams with a $10 million contract to a quarterback, or the Ohio State athletic director saying we need $18 million a year for football. Across the board, because there's so many scholarship players in a university at our level, the cost is not as high because unlike basketball, where you have few people on the roster, limited rosters, you have large rosters, over 100 with walk-ons, 85 scholarship athletes. And for football, for the vast majority, there's no football after college. So these kids want to play. They will play somewhere for zero or little money. Whereas in basketball, they have careers afterwards. And sometimes they'll leverage that. Yeah, I'm going to go to Greece. Pay me. So football at our level can be done at a much more reasonable cost to the collective and then the community.
A question that I get asked a lot, and you'd be a perfect one to ask, and this comes from fans and people on the outside wondering about NIL and the partnerships that exist and those that are being created. Part of what you do with the collective is connect partners with student athletes and with programs to help. And I think that people wonder, well, I don't see a lot of TV commercials, or I think you've done a terrific job in generating the content so that the fans can see those partnerships, and that corporations and donors and others in the community get connected with these athletes, and we see that happening. But that's a big piece of it, and I think in some places that is hard to find, but that's very important, isn't it?
And no doubt about it. That's the next level we need to get to. That to the corporate world, the name, image, and likeness of students, in particularly in University of New Mexico, in Albuquerque, is important because these people are recognizable. We can compare it to Rick Pitino in St. John's. I guarantee that, I don't care how good his St. John's team is, and they may sell a lot of tickets, that in the media world in New York City, no St. John's player is going to eclipse Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Brunson. It's not going to happen. But in Albuquerque, if you run a business, who had more notoriety than Jalen House? What about if Danny Granger had been playing during the NIL area? Wouldn't you want to affiliate your business with a winning program that excites the town and these individuals? So I think that's our future, and that's where we're at right now. We're trying to energize the business community here because it's a win-win for everyone.
Let's go right to this, because I think people that haven't seen it might not have any idea what your content looks like. And so I want them to get a better idea as they're watching us and listening to us what that means. It's something as simple and awesome as a sit-down dinner at a Matucci's with a student athlete and what that looks like. But you have a team that's at the Mountain West tournament, and they put together unbelievable reels from the games that are super special. You're doing a lot of great things and putting together these partners with the student athletes. But give us a couple more examples, and give the fans who maybe haven't yet decided that $20 a month, that's $240 a year, and you can get a full access to all of this, what it looks like. What can they see?
Well, they got to go to our Instagram page, 505 SVF, and you can see everything you just mentioned. I've probably watched that reel after the Mountain West Championship. I've probably watched that thing 50 times.
It's intoxicating.
Yeah, it is. It is good. And we have interviews. I did an interview in the Frontier restaurant. In the Frontier, the Ranasecs are some of our biggest supporters. I did an interview early on with Coach Mendenhall, and it was more like two guys talking. I had a little green chili stew. He had a sweet roll, and his whole staff was in the audience, and we just kind of talked about stuff. I had no prepared questions. We just went through it, what it was like to be here, and he was great. But you can see that interview on the Instagrams spot. So it's 505 SVF, and it just keeps coming. So we can now, our next goal is to align the local businesses with these kids. I don't want to throw a hypothetical out, but we can have Donovan Dent at the Frontier restaurant talking. The possibilities are endless. So if you're a local business and you want to affiliate yourself, and you also have to believe, see, this is part of what I'm seeing, or I believe, is that success on the court, selling tickets, filling the pit, filling University Stadium for football, just impacts the entire economy in Albuquerque and the state. So, we saw what happened up in Boulder with Deion Sanders. The Boulder Chamber of Commerce estimated that the 6 home games generated $72 million in direct impact and $113 million in overall economic impact. So are we going to do that? No. But can we generate $25 million, $30 million? Yep, we can.
Gosh, it's amazing to think that. And I think that you, because of the relationships that you have developed and continue to build, have a window into some of the people in our department that many who are watching don't have a chance. You've become good friends with Coach Pitino, and he has done an unbelievable job in a very short time turning around the Lobo basketball program. the quality and character of the recruits that he's bringing in, the incredible staff that helps him do that. And obviously, everything is, as you mentioned, hand in glove. But give us a snapshot of Coach Pitino as you know him, and why, just 3 years, why he's been able to make this happen like this.
Well, he's talented, and he's got a great staff. So you knew he was good. His career path was odd. At 29 years old, he was in the Big Ten. Now, he was in one of the toughest conferences in the country at not a school that was a basketball school.
One of the toughest jobs in that league.
Jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a winning record, and the guy got fired during COVID, which I think, same thing happened here. It's hard to do that to someone. I understand their circumstances, but so when all of a sudden he shows up, he's in his 30s. And he obviously comes, the DNA is there. But and I happen to have a little view of his dad way before Richard. We go, his dad grew up in the same proximity as me, a couple of years older. We followed his career, so I know all about. And he coached the Knicks, the Celtics, all teams we followed. They're different guys. They're completely different. But Richard is an East Coast guy. He's been in the South and Minnesota. He has that ingrained, grew up rooting for the Knicks and the Yankees and the Giants. We share a certain sensibility, but, he's a young guy and he's a pain in the butt, and, I have to put him in his place. No, I'm just joking. Well, maybe I'm not joking so much. But we have a good East Coast rapport, and he's done an incredible job. His staff is great. The staff has stayed on, the last 2 years is usually turnover. And I think that the depth on this team is better than any team in Lobo history. I'll go out on a limb. The depth. Now, I'm not, the schedule's murderous. And who knows, and if Richard has an off year of coaching, maybe they won't be that good and it'll be his fault.
The sense of humor is there, too, when you guys are sharing a cigar. How good is that?
That's great. That was our introduction. First time I talked NIL with him, we were in a golf cart at Sandia, and I'm a cigar smoker. I always ask, do you mind if I smoke? And right before I asked him, he asked me if I wanted a Cuban, so I knew he was a pretty good guy.
Great stuff. Kurt, we could just keep going and going and going. Let's do one last plug because the Lobo men's basketball team does not return to glory and win the Mountain West Tournament Championship in 2024 without the hard work of 505 Sports Venture Foundation and its president and founder, Kurt Roth, and all of your great contributors and your staff. The last piece here is the push. And you said it, football is right at the front. If Lobo Athletics wants to take that next step, whatever that looks like, football is going to drive it, and that's got to be a big piece of it.
No doubt about it. It will happen. I have full confidence in Coach Mendenhall and his staff, and I will tell anyone if they ever get a chance to see him do a public presentation to go to it.
Could not agree more.
We were talking about it. Two things I want to mention. We were talking about this earlier today. One of the things I love about the Mendenhall organization, as I will call it, is that he's emphasizing the New Mexico State Championship. I think that we've taken that for granted at UNM, and we have not done well recently. The other thing is my chief of staff, Nancy Marquez, would punch me, and she may anyway, if I didn't mention the charitable element, the community element of our NIL movement. We are open and we are active with placing the student athletes at charitable events. We just had two of the guys appear at the Children's Cancer event last week. We've got a back-to-school event on the 20th. We did backpack drives. If you are involved with a charity in Albuquerque or anywhere in New Mexico, and you feel that the attendance or using the name, image, and likeness of our student athletes in any way, contact us, because that's it's the give back portion of name, image, and likeness, and that is key to what we're doing.
And that's a great point, because that's where you can take the third-party partner, whether it's a corporation, an individual, someone who wants to be connected with this charity, and they can bring the student athlete, and then now you have that's the full scope of it, right?
That's exactly. Well, you just laid it out, and like I said, I'm glad you did it because I was getting to it, and I wouldn't have been able to talk to Ms. Marquez if I didn't get to that. But that is vital. If you're a corporate entity, you want to use our students to support the charity of your choice. It's a no-brainer, and it's great, and the student athletes love it. They love it. We have a great group who these guys and gals sign up for stuff, and they appear, and it's been great.
Kurt, keep doing the great work. What you've done for Lobo Athletics already is amazing, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. Thanks for being with us on the Lobo Pod.
My pleasure.
All right, Kurt Roth, 505 Sports Venture Foundation, your guest on the Lobo Pod.
The Lobo Pod is a production of UNM Athletics.